Good evening and welcome to Failure Isn't the End of Your Story. A bit of a personal one tonight because we go a little bit more deep into some of the realities that come with the fear of failing in business. So less of an instructional lesson tonight of going through how a certain system works, and a little bit more of a deeper look into some of the things that you may not expect when it comes to facing a potential failure of business, or even more so into accepting that sometimes businesses can fail. My name's Dante. I'll be taking you through tonight. Thanks to Business Station's Australian Small Business Advisory Services Digital Solutions Program, which is conducted in Western Australia by Business Station, in Queensland by Regional Development Australia's Brisbane office, and Treaty Business Consulting in the Northern Territory. We may have a few people turn up today. I might have a few people coming in late. I know late in the day can be a little bit difficult to do, but thank you to those who have managed to join us tonight. Who this is for tonight is those who kind of resonate with some of this. Maya Angelou is an activist, a poet, a writer, and just a general amazing person who has had a very big impact in the world. But even she says that you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. Some really motivational words. And that comes into, I guess, the whole work of failure and either preparing for it or knowing the reality of what happens when businesses do fail. Who this is for tonight is the business owners who are worried that their business may be going under, business owners who want to be prepared for the possibility that failure might actually happen. It may be a very real thing that comes along in the future. And for those who may even be too scared to even start a business because there's such a high chance of failure, especially when it comes to small business. We'll look at some of those very specific cases soon. What we'll cover this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are, is the truth about business failure. We're going to dispel a few myths in amongst all that too. We'll look at 3 very real Australian businesses that failed and what happened after that. We often hear about the collapses of businesses, or we hear about the successes of businesses, but we very rarely ever hear what happens next. Once they've collapsed, what is the real impact on those people? And what do they do next? And thirdly, we're going to look at what helps prevent failure from happening. So I have a little bit of a chat around that based upon some of the experiences of those people that we're talking about in here. Now, hopefully we'll get out a little bit earlier tonight because it is it's a very particular topic that's not really a lesson as such, or more of a life lesson than really looking at it as here's the government programs you do, or here's the software that you use. So hopefully this is going to give you a little bit of information that shows that even if failure is imminent in your business, there is something that comes next. A little bit about me. I've owned a few businesses in the past. My most recent one is Clickstarter that recently got merged into a bigger organization who's investing a bit of capital in that, which is a really good success for me. It's given me time to freed up to work in a business consulting capacity. Also with the Boost with Facebook program for Facebook Australia and New Zealand, doing some training of people, especially in digital literacy for older Australians through Digital Springboard from Google. I've been setting up a few little nights, I won't say the word up there, but you can read it on the screen, nights in Darwin, and also looking to go to the Gold Coast soon to do with helping to destigmatise failure. That's through the Failure Institute as well. Working with new business owners through the NEIS program, the New Enterprise Incentive Scheme, which has been quite an eye-opening experience for me, just seeing where people are at the very beginning of their journey of starting a business, and also working with the Australian Small Business Advisory Services Digital Solutions Program. It's quite great. I've been able to sort of step back a little bit from my business now, still owning it, still in control of it, but being able to do the things I really love doing, which is quite often these webinars just like this. So you might have come across a few of these stats. They're very, very commonly spread around. The 33% of new businesses fail within their first year, within the first 12 months. Wow, how inspirational is that? A third of them wiped out. Even worse, by the year 2, 50% of small businesses, particularly new ones, can be wiped out just like that. The news is worse for those who have failed within 5 years. 75% of businesses will fail within 5 years. But there's a flip side to this story. And it's not just saying, well, at least 15% or 25% didn't fail. The reality is, though, that yes, sure, 15% of new businesses fail within their first year, but that's a lot less than what we said before, 33%. Only 15% of them will fail in their first year when they've used programs and advisors and undertaken business planning processes, looked at things like business model canvases, really planning out how they're doing their business. So you go from 33% down to 15% if you actually do some planning and use the programs that are out there to assist small businesses. That's a massive difference. So is this. Instead of 50% of new businesses failing within 2 years, when you're using programs, advisors, and taking real business planning processes in place, that 50% reduces to 21%. So this is why you quite often see, well, why is there so many people quitting when there's so many government programs around? Because most businesses are not using them. And then you got 23%, not 75%, 23% of businesses failing within 5 years when they use these programs and advisors and go through the planning process of really getting behind what they're going to do with their business. Now, that's a lot better figure than 75%. What it's telling us is essentially the vast majority of businesses who fail do so because they have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea whatsoever. There may be no way for them to understand that there's programs out there. There's advisors that provide some of this. There's free webinars all the time that are going on, like these ones here. That it's the ones that really don't have any idea what they're doing that tend to be the ones that fail. Yes, some of them still do when they have those tools in their place. There's a vastly smaller amount who do when they've got the right advice coming from the right people. Now, the question will be obviously, where does that right advice come from? Well, the idea is you've got to test that out. You've got to try a few people. You've got to try a few methods. And I always say, try the free programs first, like your ASBAS kind of programs where you can get, free advice through systems like this, or at least low cost through one-to-one. Local business enterprise centers are also very helpful for getting that kind of advice in. Hooking up with business networks where you can actually meet people who have been through all this before and succeeded out the other end. I can help you with the resources you need, sometimes even investment, even though that's not usually the problem that fails a business in the first year. A few myths about business when it fails is that bankruptcy is the ultimate sign of failure. Honestly, bankruptcy can be a massive relief. It can be the one thing when you have got to that point of failure where the business is just not going to succeed and there's so many phone calls and letters coming from all the creditors that you just go, I need to end this. Bankruptcy is a much more organized way of ending it rather than just, doing a Christopher Skase, hopping off a plane and heading to Mallorca and hoping that the authorities won't be able to catch up with you. It's not the preferred way of dealing with this. Bankruptcy is a very formal process that sounds very, very scary, but the reality is it helps a lot of people who have failed businesses get a life after business. It doesn't have to be an ultimate sign of failure. In fact, in some cases, it's a sign of the success of being able to see that there's more important things in your life, like your family, rather than just keeping that business alive for the sake of keeping a business alive. The second myth is that you will lose your friends and family. This is not generally the case. Your friends and family aren't the ones paying your bills anyway. And if friends are only around because you have a successful business, they're not friends at all. Like, they're not even close to what friends are. They're just hangers on. They're people who are just there to share in the joy of your successes. But if they're not there during the periods where you need a little bit of even emotional support as them being friends, someone to talk to, then these aren't friends. And the same goes for family. Family only likes you when you're succeeding. That's not family. That's a dictatorship. And that can vary very widely when it comes to cultures. I know that there's some cultures that really do view failure as a particularly harsh thing. Thankfully, we're in Australia now. So we've got this option of being able to go, well, failure can still happen and you can still rise again. Remember that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. And I can't stand the man personally, but I have to say he's resilient. He's had, 3 bankruptcies, umpteen different failed businesses, and yet he's still a billionaire and is the president of the United States. How in the heck does that work? So the idea that you'll lose all the things you have, everything you have, all your friends and family, it's not necessarily true in all cases. Whilst family and friends may be affected by that loss, if they are basing their friendship on the fact that you have a successful business, then I'd be seriously considering that your real friends are probably not them. Another myth is that you'll never financially recover. You'll never, ever get back to any sort of semblance of success. And that is the biggest lie ever. You look at people, again, like Donald Trump, who's had multiple failures. You look at people like, Mark Zuckerberg failed university and dropped out and then formed Facebook. So there's countless stories about people who may have failed in some way. They may have failed at university, they may have failed in high school and gone on to be much more successful business people. Or they could have been people who had a previous business and they've gone on to have another business that broke the pattern of failure before and actually had some success to it. And remember too, that success after a failed business doesn't necessarily have to be another business. I've got a story a little bit later on of someone who had the failed business and went, you know what? I just don't want to do this. I don't think I'm very good at it. I'm much better at being an employee. So in her case, it would have been a failure to continue going down the way she went, and she has recovered financially. In fact, since failing back in about 2011, she's now going on an international holiday every year with her husband and enjoying a life with her kids that she never would have had if she had to continue to try and battle that business and, or to use a colloquialism, flog that dead horse. Another myth is you're going to go to jail if your business fails. That's a fear that seems to be beaten into us. I don't know who beats that into us, that the idea that we're going to go to jail if we can't pay our bills. You can't go to jail for not paying your bills. You can have jail time when you evade taxes, absolutely. But taxes are the first thing that gets paid when it comes to a bankruptcy, for instance. So bankruptcy won't include your taxes. You can't get away from the tax debt. You still have to face that, which means that as long as you've got a payment arrangement that you can talk and you're willing to talk to the tax department about the ATO, you're not going to go to jail. And especially if you're a failed small business, they're not after you, taking you to jail. They're after the people who are fleecing them for millions and millions and millions. They're the ones they're focused on. Whilst everybody is responsible to pay their tax bill, the reality is that they don't want to put you in jail because it just makes no sense, just filling the jails full of people who have tried to create businesses and failed. So that myth that you'll go to jail because you failed a business and you declare bankruptcy is just, it's a fairy tale. It's not what actually happens. So what we'll do now is go through a few stories about very real businesses that have had very real successes and very real failures. So Lee and Sean, a company called Impressions, was quite some time ago. They're events decorators. So part of what they did was this idea that they could create decorations for weddings and parties and occasions. You know, the people who come in, put the covers on the tables and the centerpieces in the middle of the tables and put the curtains and drapes up on the stage, and or the arch where someone goes to walk through to have their wedding and to use their vows. They then would do the same kind of thing for decorating and setting up corporate events and rather large government events too, and use what they made on them, so because they always made better money out of those things, to offer lower costs for individuals and small events like weddings, so that they could, the things they loved doing was working on weddings. They just loved to be around the joy of people's lives, and weddings and engagement parties and birthdays and christenings and all those kind of things were just, they were celebrations. They weren't corporate things where you had no interest in the outcome. They were actually people, and they really were driven by that. They just loved working with people who were celebrating. And then they wanted to expand into other areas like offering private hire car services for transferring brides between home and church, or or the church and the event center, the function center. And they also wanted to offer furniture hire for those events, because sometimes people would have an event in a venue that didn't have furniture, didn't have chairs, didn't have tables. So they started off really, very well in a smaller business, just out of the back of a shed, and were able to service that sector very well. They were getting lots of great stuff from big government events, and they were initially able to offer those lower costs for individuals. The problems kind of came about when they tried to expand before they'd actually worked out all the things that were wrong with their business to begin with. So things that could have been wrong with their business were, did they have the cash flow to be able to splash out on all these cars and furniture? And could they really project that there was going to be enough money to come in to be able to cover the repayment costs of those things, plus the rent, plus the electricity, plus their staff, plus all the things they already have to pay, including old tax bills that were mounting up on them. What essentially went wrong with them is that the town that we're in had massive economic changing conditions. Suddenly a lot of people left town, and that meant a lot of money left town. So there wasn't as much money left for doing things that were very nice, like decorating venues. Another thing that happened when this occurred was suddenly flights to Bali from their town got very, very cheap. It was very, very cheap for them to fly to Bali, or anyone to fly to Bali and have a wedding. In fact, it took such a large chunk of the usual wedding customer base that they no longer had that market at all. They went from having 20 weddings per season to having just one. And that was a massive chunk out of their income and supported a lot of their staff members who were there to work with the celebrations side of the business. They still got some government stuff here and there, but that proved to not be as fruitful as they thought, because now suddenly a lot of small conferences were going into Bali if they were smaller, small to medium enterprises, and doing them over there. They also had a situation where a lot of things were moving interstate. This is a period of time where flights in general were quite cheap. Flights to Bali were cheap, flights interstate were quite cheap, and they just lost so much of that, even that government business. And then the final nail in the coffin was when a private hire car business of theirs that they'd expanded into received a massive tax bill that they knew they could never, ever pay back easily without having to sell off assets and all kinds of stuff. They were in all manner of struggle, all manner of strife, and they just had to fold the business and then basically declare bankruptcy. They could not pay their bills, and it got out of control. But where they are today is far from where they were. So Lee is the person I was talking about earlier. She decided that business wasn't for her, and she went on to study to become a nurse, particularly in midwifery. She wanted to become a midwife. And I'm really proud to say that she graduated in November last year. So she's now a qualified nurse and midwife, and she's just about to get her first posting in Queensland, where she's going to become a full-time nurse for the first time. She had no desire to be in business again. She'd done it before. She'd had success with her first business. The second business, which she then involved with Sean, didn't go so great. In fact, it ended up with them both being bankrupt. So she said, you know what, I'm done. I wanted to get involved in the process of childbirth and looking after mothers for a very long time. So she went and studied to do exactly that. And the result is she's now a qualified nurse who is about to do essentially what was her dream job. Sean, though, he still had an entrepreneurial spirit about him. He went and started driving taxis and did it long, long hours and did so much work to make enough money to start his own small catalog and leaflet distribution business. He now has over 30 people working for him as, walking along, driving along, dropping off leaflets, all that, and runs a very large territory of suburbs where he is in charge of the delivering of that material. So those junk mail that's in the letterboxes, poor old Sean is one of the people that's behind some of that if you live in a certain part of southeast Queensland right now. So clearly they had failure, yes, in business, but it's allowed them to go and do something else. In Lee's case, she decided that just business wasn't for her. But Sean well, business is for me, but I'm going to be a little bit more careful with it this time. I'm not going to do the same thing this time. I'm going to do something a little bit different and start it up. And he didn't go straight into employing 30 people. No. What he started was just to do it himself and then do it with a couple of people. And then next thing he had a team of 12. And then he got someone else's territory. And now he's got 30 people working for him all over his particular part of Queensland. The second story will come from Dan, the video producer. He had a business called 1530. Now, this business was all about the idea that you could make cheap, quick TV ads and corporate videos for less than those big professional agencies. Have you ever tried to advertise on TV before? It's not just about the cost of the airtime on the TV station. There's a massive cost when it comes to making the actual ad as well. It can get really, really super pricey. So what they did through 1530 was to offer upsells of things like websites or graphic design, voiceovers for radio ads, anything to sort of give a little bit extra so they could get in there. They were already charging well under what the market price was. But then they managed to add some extra value as well. It seemed like a great idea. The customer would get more for their money. Dan would get money coming in. It'd be all great. And the ultimate thing was to get a larger supply contract from a regional radio or TV network so they could provide the TV and radio ads that would go with this. The idea is even great. The company was called 1530, as in 15-second and 30-second ads. It was even clever for people to remember. It seemed to have everything going for it. But there were a couple of downsides in there. And this is back in 2010. He was the only one person working in that business, just him. He was doing all the work. It was his side gig because he was also working a full-time job that was quite an involved full-time job. It wasn't like a clock on, clock off kind of job. It was like wake up early, go to bed late, work your weekends and up to 2 a.m. doing the side gig, go to bed at 2 a.m. and wake up at 7 and do it all over again. He had a simple lack of capacity when the work started coming in. Because he was kind of good at what he did, the work did come in. But his pricing was so unrealistically low. He was really trying to impress that lower end of the market where people just can't afford much. But here's an idea of something they can do, get good quality at a very low price. The problem with that is that it was actually costing more for his equipment rental and software and his computers and his office rental and all that. It was costing him more than he was actually making, which is kind of madness when you think about it. He was doing all this extra work, but he was actually making no profit out of it. His full-time job was actually subsidizing a business that had a very failed business model behind it. And in the third instance, when he did get that big contract, he failed to deliver it and had to pay others to carry out the work for him because it was just too big for him to handle. The problem is the others charged more for the time that he was charging the contract for. So to avoid any sort of legal problems of just simply not delivering it after being paid, he ended up losing nearly $12,000 on that contract, which meant that any sort of debt he was already carrying with credit cards and personal loans and car loans now had an additional $12,000 stacked on top of it. It was not a pretty place to be. But that's not where his story ended. He did declare bankruptcy. He had to. It was just in too much debt, and continued a full-time job for a further 7 years before he attempted yet another business. And when he did try that business, he tried this, a loyalty program. He'd learned how to program software. He'd learned how to do a lot of coding, build websites, and do a lot of online stuff that allowed him to build something that had the idea of a loyalty rewards program for small retailers in country and regional towns. That's very much like what you'd find with Flybuys or Woolworths Rewards, something which we could gather points and get rewards for it. And the monthly fees of the retailers that were participating in this program were quite low, but across a lot of retailers, it will be enough to fund cash rewards and prizes for the people who participated. Even the retailers who participated could get cash incentives to do it. The idea was to eventually attract those larger chains that are in country areas and the country and remote and regional shopping centres that didn't get the ability to use things like Westfield and their loyalty programs and the power of their purchasing. So the idea was that they would eventually be the ones that made the real money for it. Dan had just left his job of 13 years. And so he was looking at that as an idea of going, well, you know what, this could be a really great way for me to use the payout I got from my 13 years job. I got a really good redundancy payout. So yeah, it makes sense that Dan's going to do this. He's going to go, well, I'm going to invest my money into this. But what went wrong is the iPads he was using for it in his test market, which was Lismore, New South Wales, they kept getting stolen and had to keep being replaced. Now, his payout wasn't, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions. His payout was about $50,000. So that $50,000 started to get chewed up a lot in going and replacing iPads every time they had to be replaced. trying to use things like Android tablets that were cheaper but just didn't work properly. So there was a bunch of those that didn't get working. The second thing is that the project actually directly caused a small crime wave in the New South Wales town of Lismore. And that crime wave was that once all these iPads in this test market that was running were in these stores, suddenly people decided to smash windows to steal those iPads they could see in those shops. And most of these shops had no prior real alarm systems or security systems. They were small retailers. But there's something about it when you put something as valuable as an iPad, which at the time, you're talking about 2017, were a very hot property. They were a very hot product that people really wanted. It was really, really tempting for people who like to steal such things to just smash a window and go and steal that thing and take it. So what happened is that a string of these smash and grabs started happening in this town to such a point where it was not just noticed by local authorities, but local media as well, which then went on to blame this particular product that Dan had created. A product which, in number 3, no one was actually looking for. No one wanted this product. It was essentially solving a problem that nobody had asked him to solve. He just had this idea, knew how to execute it, and thought, let's give it a go. The problem was nobody actually really needed it. So what happened after that? Well, when he went and collected the equipment, he asked the retailers what it is that they really needed. And that sort of stuff was, they needed websites. They needed help with social media. They needed to know how to use advertising on these new digital mediums. So not so new at the time was Google, but Facebook as an advertising platform in 2017 was still growing. It was still a very, very fresh green thing that people weren't quite sure how to do. Instructions on how to do social media, use systems like Google and Gmail and Calendar and Office 365. What they needed was somebody to answer the issues they had, because in small towns, now Lismore's not that small, there is some IT support there, but in some other towns, not far from Lismore, you do not have IT support. You do not have someone who knows how to set these things up. You either have to work it out for yourself or have a trusted partner or provider that can do that. So Dan's idea was that when he collected all that equipment and got that feedback and discovered what these people really actually needed, he carefully started up a new business to deliver that. And look, he had to move interstate to do it. He couldn't continue to do it in the area that he was doing it because it kind of ruined that relationship. No one really wanted to see him again after he collected the last few iPads that were left. He also lost $53,000. A lot of money, which is just a throwaway. But it was money that he essentially had, plus a little bit that he had from other savings. So he didn't have anything to work with. So he used pretty much his last $1,500 to book a flight to Darwin, where he formed a company called Clickstarter. So those two last stories were actually me. Dan is short for Dante. That's the experience I had with business and business failure. Very, very personal stories because they hurt, they cost a lot of money. And I went through those hardships of wondering what bankruptcy would feel like. Would I recover from bankruptcy? What will people think when they know I've gone through bankruptcy? Would anyone ever take me seriously again? Would I get a job again? Would I ever be able to have another business if that's what I chose to do? Turns out, yes, I could. Yes, I did. And yes, I've done that. And this is not just a story of me. This is a story that's very, very common. It's often like a story, you think of the story of the Phoenix. It has to crash and burn before it rises again for a new cycle. And I've had to do that twice now with 2 failed businesses before I actually had a business that really, really succeeded. And today that business that succeeded is Clickstarter, operating in 3 states now, has 12 staff and contractors around the country, and recently merged its operations with another company who has invested a bunch of capital with me to grow it further, to take it further into those markets. And Clickstarter is essentially a digital marketing agency that does training, that does websites, all that sort of stuff. I'm not here to sell that. But the idea is that from the first failure I had, it made me very hand shy and said, oh, I don't know how to do this. I'm just going to go and learn the stuff and become an employee again. So upon doing that, I actually learned all the skills I needed to try something new. When I finally did try something new, when I was made redundant from that job in 2017, I was able to try something. It failed. But at the end of that failure, I was able to do a review of both me and the things I'd done wrong, and come up with a logical conclusion that I'm still smart, I'm still capable, I'm still able to do these things, but I'm doing it in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing, and I probably was doing it at the wrong time. That whole thing of trying to solve a problem that no one actually had. So the idea now is that the successful business is actually helping people with things they actually need, and they're actually asking to have fixed for them. It's a very big difference when you do a little bit of market research before you start a business. And the other thing is we did too this time is we got the right advice from the right people. I started hanging around business networks. I started hanging around other business people. I didn't want to be hanging around a bunch of employees all my life because they weren't the people I needed to learn from. I needed to learn from people who had succeeded and failed and tried things and didn't try things. Getting around the people that I admired was what was capable of putting. You often hear people talking about a mindset and the success mindset and the idea that you think your way to success. Whilst I don't think there's any magic formula where you wave a wand and go, yay, positive thinking, let's make money, I do believe that you build patterns in your life. I had a pattern of failure that stopped at a point where I went, no, I need to get around the people who have a pattern of success. You become the people you hang around. You just become the product of your habits. And in my case, yes, I did become the product of my habits of failure. But then I stopped that and turned it around and decided to be around people. I had a lot of skills to learn and had a lot of skills to offer. And it took me a while to realize that I was very smart and actually knew stuff that other people didn't. And I was capable of bringing that expertise to them. So there really is life after failure. There really is an opportunity for you to fail and try again. The idea that bankruptcy is the end of everything is not true. You're not going to go to jail for having a failed business. You may go to jail for being a bad person, but not for having a business that just happens to fail. There's always an opportunity to learn something new. There's always an opportunity to get that failure and take the bones of it and grow something new. This is why I've used plants throughout this presentation, because they represent the idea that all these plants are tropical plants, so we can take them from cuttings. My mum does it all the time in her garden. She'll take the cuttings of a plant that's on its way out and replant those cuttings and develop them so they grow a new something, a new thing, a new plant. But she won't make the same mistake as last time. She'll water it differently. It'll have better drainage. It'll be in a better position where it gets just the right amount of sunlight instead of the too little sunlight it was getting. And the same thing goes for the new idea that you're going to come up with the ideas you're going to move forward with out of that failure, is that you'll take the cutting from the dying one and you'll have that there in a glass of water or just a fresh patch of dirt. And then you'll start watering it with the right things, fertilizing with the right stuff, giving it the right amount of sunshine, the right amount of attention, the right amount of even expertise that you have to pick up, learning the right things. You're tonight doing the right thing because you're learning. You're taking in inspiration where you can. You're taking in skills where you can, taking advantage of free webinars. Do more of them. Do as many as you can. Learn from the experts, the people who have succeeded, the people who've got the knowledge. Then you'll know what you're talking about. You know what you're going into. And then do your research. See if somebody wants that plant. If they don't, well, then don't take a cutting of it. Go and try a different plant or a different garden altogether. It's actually okay to say, I don't want to be in business anymore. It's completely and utterly okay to say it. But it's also okay to say, yeah, this business isn't doing so well. I might try something new. You're better off to make those decisions earlier than later. The mantra that used to go around Facebook for quite a lot of years when they were very, very new and starting up was that that you should fail fast so you fail cheap. So you try new things, you try them fast, and make sure if they're going to fail, they fail very quickly before you've invested too much into them. So you can get out and try something new without it infecting everything else you're doing. Now, whilst that has caused a bit of a cultural problem in Facebook in more recent years, it gives you an idea that if you can try something new without investing too much in it, or if you can take something you did fail at before and try that, like whatever was in that that was still something that could be used or you can do without having to invest thousands of dollars into it, it could be a really valuable way for you to start the next thing you're doing. Even if you lose all your money. In 2017, I lost my car because, I had to pay people what I owed them, and I had to sell my car to do that. So that was a pretty shame-filled moment. But at the time, it didn't give me shame, because shame would have been not paying people what I owed them. So instead, I did what I needed to do to ensure that I could go forward and have a successful business next. Not one where people go, oh, he still owes us $2,000. He still owes us $10,000. Oh yeah, you see, he started a new business in a new town. He's just a failure and he's just going to rip everybody else off. You don't want that reputation going forward. You don't get that from failing in business. You get that from failing to get out of business gracefully, so that you can take control of that process. If you honestly and truly believe your current business is going to fail and there's nothing you can do to stop it, now is the time to take the steps it takes to plan that failure. Rather than sliding down the banister and crashing into a wall, walk down the stairs, but make the calls, make the payment arrangements, get in touch with the ATO. They're very, very reasonable when it comes to making payment arrangements. And take advantage of the things around you that help you to get to the next thing, the next idea, the next business, the next enterprise, or maybe just give it all up and go and get a job. Either which way, it's not going to kill you. It doesn't have to be a great big mental burden when it comes to failing at business. I unfortunately saw my uncle go through the loss of his construction business back in the 90s recession. A business that grew very, very quickly over a few years and then crashed even more quickly. They went from living on a mansion on a hill overlooking a beach in northern beaches of Sydney to being stuck in a one-room apartment, on the Central Coast with nothing but memories of failure. They never really recovered from that personally, because so much of what they had in life was based around all these things they had to show off it to everybody. When it came down to it, we as family members, we didn't care for their glossy lifestyle. We didn't care for their Jaguars and their Mediterranean mansions on a hill. We just liked being around it because they were fun people to be around. And so when they weren't fun, we gathered around them to go, you know what? We're here for you regardless. So I was very, very fortunate to have that experience, so that when I failed my businesses in the past, I had the support of friends and family to say, look, we can see you going through a thing here. We'll give you a bit of space. But, if you're going to get too depressed and too down the dumps, we're going to come in and kick your backside and get you back into action because you're too good for this. So I'm very fortunate to have that. And you're very fortunate as well to have access to government programs. There's grants. There's free help that's out there. There's webinars after webinar after webinar. Gosh, I'm doing 16 of them a month myself. So take advantage of them. Give yourself the chance to succeed. Or if you're going to fail, fail gracefully. The same way you should age. Fail gracefully. So we're really going to get an early mark here because there's not been a lot of questions coming through, which makes it a very, very short webinar. But if you'd like to view it again, it's available at Business Station's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in Business Station. And in about 48 hours, this particular video will be watchable again. If you'd like to share it with friends or like to ask any questions or comments in there as well, you can. If you'd like to contact me directly on any sort of advice I may have for, your particular circumstance where you feel like your business might be failing or you'd like to try and avoid failure, I'm more than happy to share a bit more of what I went through, and some of the people, like especially Lee and Sean, are very close friends of mine. And they've certainly got a lot of words of wisdom that they would have in hindsight now that they've had a very massive failure of business and now moved on to bigger and brighter, better things. So email me, dante@clickstarter.com.au, or we can have Facebook or LinkedIn. You're most welcome there to connect with me, especially LinkedIn. I'm actually very, very, even though I work for Facebook these days, I didn't even know how that would happen. How does someone accidentally work for Facebook? But in LinkedIn's case, I'm very, very active there and very, very keen to connect with other business people there who are, even going through a little bit of a hassle. If I can give like a little bit of advice or the right little sort of nudge in the right direction, I'm more than happy to do that. So thank you for joining me tonight. And I hope to see you at some more of our presentations we're going to have right through September, till September, when hopefully we'll be able to return back to a semblance of normal. So thank you so much again, and good night, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. See you later.